Hello friends, welcome to my YouTube channel MT Zama's Polity and Governance. I am MT Zama, your educator and mentor. Today we are going to discuss a topic that is important not only for those who are preparing for civil services examination or for that matter any other examination, but even for those who are ordinary citizens of this country, those who want to evolve themselves as conscious, aware, and active citizen of this country. So here it goes. Today's topic is how the government is formed after elections. And what is the difference between the Council of Ministers and the Cabinet? So now you very well know, you could understand that the context is provided by the general elections to the 18th Lok Sabha that was just concluded in the country, and there was a lot of hurly-burly of elections. Now the dust have settled. Now the new Lok Sabha is being constituted. It is in the process of getting constituted. A new government is already constituted by the President of India. Ministers have been administered oath of office. Okay, so now it is high time that we must be very clear about the exact process and the concepts involved in the process of formation of a new government, right? So today's topic is how the government is formed after elections, right? Now see, I'm sure you are aware that we Indians have adopted a parliamentary form of government, parliamentary form of democracy. Parliamentary form of democracy, that is political system, right? Now, what is the distinctive feature of a parliamentary system of democracy? One of the distinctive features is that we have dual heads, right? One is the constitutional head of the state, that is the President of India. President. And the other head is the head of the government, that is the Council of Ministers, headed by the Prime Minister. Okay? So, one of the distinctive features of a parliamentary system of government is that there are dual heads. Means there are two heads. One is the president, another is the Council of Ministers, which is a plural body and that is headed by the Prime Minister. Now, the President of India's position is that he is the constitutional head of the state. And as such, he has to exercise nominal powers. So he is also referred to as nominal head of the state, nominal head. Or in Latin, the term de jure is also used, right? And for the head of the government, which exercises real powers, the term de facto head is also used. I'm sure you are aware of these, basic things. Now, the President of India, as the de jure head or the nominal head, exercises, powers only theoretically. All the decisions are taken in the name of the president. But the president exercises his powers on the advice of the Council of Ministers. And therefore, the real powers in a parliamentary system of government, the real executive powers are exercised by the Council of Ministers, whose head is the Prime Minister, right? So that's the most important distinction between That is the most important distinction of a parliamentary form of democracy, and that is how it is different from a presidential system of democracy. In a presidential system of democracy, as in America, there is no council of ministers. They only have a president who exercises both the role, who performs both the role of the constitutional head of the state as well as the role of the real head of the state, that is, head of the government. So, there are no dual heads in presidential system, singular heads. Here it is dual heads. Now, coming to today's, topic of discussion, that is how the government is formed in India. Now that general elections to the 18th Lok Sabha have just been concluded. And who conducted the elections? It is the Election Commission of India, which is under the constitution mandated to conduct free and fair elections, right? So for the 18th Lok Sabha, the elections have just been concluded. Now, once the results were out and the Election Commission of India presented before the President of India a certified copy of the list of all the newly elected members of parliament, then the ball was in the court of the president. Now, the spotlight shifted onto the president, who the president will invite to form the government, right? So, after elections were concluded by the Election Commission, the spotlight shifted onto the president. So, President of India, being the constitutional head of the state and constitutional head of the union executive, he has to invite a person to take oath as Prime Minister of the country, right? So now, who he will invite to constitute the government, to become the Prime Minister? Now, this is a common knowledge that the party that commands majority in the Lok Sabha or a coalition of parties that, the leader of the coalition of parties or the leader of the largest party but that also commands majority in the Lok Sabha, that leader is invited by the President of India to form a new government, right? So now, if you take the example of the latest results, you know that NDA, National Democratic Alliance, that is a pre-poll alliance of parties, right? This scored 293 seats in the Lok Sabha. And that is well ahead of the halfway mark. The halfway mark is 272 out of 543. That is the halfway mark. So to form a government, one requires more than the halfway mark. There is more than 272. That is 273 or more. Now, in this case, since NDA has 293, and therefore the National Democratic Alliance, it selected Narendra Modi as its leader. Once it chose Narendra Modi as its leader, the president invited him to form the new government, right? So, this is the process. This is the convention. This is a, parliamentary democracy convention. This is not mentioned in the constitution as to who the President of India will invite to form a new government. But this is a constitutional convention. This is a practice, and that is as good as a constitutional provision. This cannot be violated. Even though BJP on its own did not get majority, but it was a part of a larger alliance, that is NDA, that secured the majority in the last election. And therefore, it was the responsibility of the President of India to invite the leader of the NDA. So NDA parliamentary party means the newly elected parliamentary members belonging to the NDA would choose its own leader, and that leader would eventually be invited by the President of India to form a new government, right? So this is how a government is formed. Now, once the Prime Minister is invited, Prime Minister is appointed by the President of India, under Article 75 of the Constitution, Article 75 of the Constitution, the Prime Minister shall be appointed by the President and other ministers shall be appointed by the President on the advice of the Prime Minister. Now, in this case, Narendra Modi was chosen as a leader of the NDA parliamentary party and he was invited by the President to become the Prime Minister. Once he became the Prime Minister, it was his prerogative to constitute his Council of Ministers. Okay? So it is his प्रेरोगेटिव, ये इनका विशेषाधिकार है कि वो किसी भी मेंबर ऑफ पार्लियामेंट को, और हो सकता है इवन फ्रॉम आउटसाइड ऑफ द पार्लियामेंट, वो किसी को भी अपने मंत्रिमंडल में शामिल कर सकते हैं. ही कैन इंक्लूड एनी person who is qualified for this purpose to be part of his Union Council of Ministers. And this is how the President of India, administered oath of office of a minister, to a number of newly elected parliamentary members belonging to the NDA, different constituents of NDA. So I hope you understood how the government is formed after general elections to a new Lok Sabha. Right? Now the next question is difference between the Council of Ministers and the Cabinet. Right? So the Council of Ministers and the Cabinet, these are two institutions. Right? One is Council of Ministers, another is Cabinet. So what is the difference between the two? Can we use the two terms interchangeably? एक की जगह दूसरे को यूज कर सकते हैं क्या? Technically, we cannot use the two terms interchangeably. Both have different meanings in the Indian context particularly, right? But yes, in common parlance, we do use the two terms interchangeably, right? In common parlance, because people do not make a distinction between the two. However, from constitutional point of view, legal point of view, and technical point of view, the two terms are different. They connote different meanings, right? Now, what is the difference? The difference is that while the Council of Ministers, I write this in short form, COMS, Council of Ministers. The Council of Ministers is a larger body that comprises ministers of various ranks. So, ministers in the Narendra Modi cabinet, they belong to different categories, different ranks. Some are cabinet rank ministers, some are ministers of state rank, and some are ministers of state rank with independent charge, right? And when we use the term Council of Ministers, this includes all the categories of ministers. Fine? I hope you understood this. But then when we use the term cabinet, it comprises only ministers with cabinet rank, right? Now look at this slide. Though the two terms are often used interchangeably, the two are technically different terms in the Indian context. The term Council of Ministers include all the different categories of ministers, whereas cabinet comprises only the ministers with cabinet rank. And the different categories of ministers generally are, number one, the ministers with cabinet rank. For instance, Rajnath Singh, he is a cabinet rank minister. Amit Shah, cabinet rank minister. Nirmala Sitharaman, cabinet rank minister. And there are many others who have been allocated this rank by the Prime Minister. Remember, this is the prerogative of the Prime Minister to not only select ministers, but also to allocate portfolios and rank to them, right? Then second category belongs to ministers of MOS rank, that is Minister of State rank, Minister of State rank with independent charge, right? And the third category, ministers with Minister of State rank. So there are three categories of ministers, right, in the present Union Council of Ministers led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Clear? Now, the term Council of Ministers thus includes the Prime Minister himself, all the ministers with cabinet rank, all ministers with MOS rank, and those with independent charge also. Whereas the cabinet, the term cabinet technically includes only the Prime Minister and all the ministers with cabinet rank. They are excluded. These categories of ministers, they are excluded from the, the institution of cabinet, right? What does the Constitution say about it? Does the Constitution categorize between different categories of ministers? No, not at all. The Constitution, everywhere, in all the articles, it only mentions Council of Ministers. That is the phrase that has been used in the Constitution in most articles, particularly Article 74 and Article 75. Now, why we refer to Article 74? It is because Article 74 says that there shall be a Council of Ministers headed by a Prime Minister to aid and advise the President of India, who shall act in accordance with such advice. That is there in Article 74. So there shall be a Council of Ministers. It does not talk about cabinet or any other categories of ministers. It only talks about Council of Ministers. Even in Article 75, it says the Prime Minister shall be appointed by the President and other ministers shall be appointed by the President on the advice of the Prime Minister. And then there are other provisions in Article 75 as well. But nowhere the term cabinet has been used or any other categorization has been, done by the Constitution of India in any provision of the Constitution. But except at one place. The term cabinet has been used in the Constitution only at one place. And that is in Article 352. You must remember this. And this 352 is about what? National emergency. National emergency. So President of India invokes national emergency under this Article 352. And it is there that the word cabinet rank has been used by the Constitution. But this was also a later addition. It was not there from the beginning, that is since 1950. It was incorporated in the Constitution in Article 352 only in 1978 with the Constitution 44th Amendment Act, right? So these are some facts you must remember. But then anyway, you should know that the Constitution of India does not categorize among the ministers, the various categories of ministers. It only talks about Council of Ministers. So it is only in practice that we use the term cabinet, or we use the term ministers of cabinet rank, ministers of state rank, ministers of state with independent charge, and there used to be some other categories also earlier, right? Categorization whatsoever exists only in practice. The word cabinet rank was incorporated in the Constitution of India in Article 352 by this Constitution Amendment Act in 1978. I hope it's clear to you. Some of these could be asked in your prelims examination. Otherwise also, for the main examination, you should know that there is a difference between Council of Ministers and Cabinet, and what exactly is the difference. Moving further, what is the status of Cabinet? What is its role? Why do we make a distinction between Council of Ministers and Cabinet, right? So, despite the formal recognition of the term Council of Ministers by the Constitution, in practice it is the Cabinet that substitutes the Council of Ministers for all practical purposes. Now, what does this mean? This means that instead of the Council of Ministers, it is the Cabinet that takes all the decisions on behalf of the Council of Ministers. And the decisions taken by the Cabinet are considered to be decisions of the government, right? In fact, Cabinet, with all the ministers with Cabinet rank, that is the apex decision making body in the government. That is the apex policy making body in the government, right? No other institution is above cabinet in the executive organ of the government, right? So, in practice, it is not the Council of Ministers whose meeting is conducted by the Prime Minister. Rather, it is the cabinet meeting that is, convened by the Prime Minister, and decisions are taken, critical, vital, and most important policy decisions are taken at the cabinet level. It is the apex decision-making body in the Government of India and comprises all the ministers with cabinet rank. Now, there are three important functions of the cabinet. Number one, putting a stamp of approval on policy decisions, senior appointments, and other important decisions of the government, right? So this is an important function of the cabinet. It exercises complete control over the entire administrative system, entire bureaucracy throughout the country. So the Government of India functions in terms of departments. Areas of functions have been distributed to those different departments. For instance, security related matters have been given to Ministry of Home Affairs. Financial management, banking system, etc. These have been given to Ministry of Finance. External security, defense of the country have been allocated to the Ministry of Defense. Trade and commerce, for that we have a different department, different ministry. For the welfare measures, policies and their implementation, we have a number of welfare departments like Women and Child Development, Department of Tribal Welfare, Minorities, etc. So there are different departments. Now, every department has under it a bureaucracy. Now, the whole of Government of India and its administrative apparatus is controlled and supervised by the cabinet. And finally, the cabinet also secures coordination among different departments and ministries or ministries. So, since the government functions in terms of departments like Railway Department, Finance Department, Environment Ministry, Civil Aviation Ministry, Surface Transport, Railways, etc. And therefore, it requires proper coordination for the smooth functioning of the entire government. All the departments, they are part of the larger Government of India. They must move in the same direction. There should be unity of purpose among all the departments. And therefore, it is very important that there should be a single institution that should be, ensuring proper and smooth coordination among all the ministries. So it is the cabinet that is responsible for securing smooth functioning and proper coordination of the departments of the Government of India. So these three are most important functions of the cabinet. I hope you understood this. Now, having understood the difference between Council of Ministers and cabinet, so now you have another topic relating to that, that is different categories of ministers. What is their relative status and role? For instance, cabinet rank ministers, ministers with cabinet rank, that is we often call it cabinet minister. Okay, cabinet minister. Amit Shah is a cabinet minister. Rajnath Singh in the present government is a cabinet minister. Nirmala Sitharaman, cabinet minister. S. Jaishankar, cabinet minister. So they are cabinet rank ministers. They are called cabinet ministers. Then we have a number of ministers of state. Okay. So a number of MPs, they are also administered oath of office as minister, but their rank would be MOS. That is, they are junior ministers. They do not have cabinet rank, and they are not part of the cabinet. They are not part of the apex decision-making body in the government, right? And then there are ministers of state with independent charge. Okay, so we are going to understand their relative status and role one by one. Number one, ministers with cabinet rank, their status and role. As you can see here, a minister with cabinet rank is the political head of a ministry. So a ministry is there. Suppose this is Ministry of Home Affairs, MOHA. Amit Shah, he is the cabinet minister heading this department, Ministry of Home Affairs, right? Similarly, you have the Defense Ministry, and Rajnath Singh heads this ministry. So cabinet rank ministers are the political head of a ministry, but then he or she may have more ministries under them. For instance, earlier Arun Jaitley, who was a cabinet rank minister in the previous government, in the previous Modi government, he was not only a cabinet rank minister in charge of law ministry, but also in charge of finance ministry, in charge of I&B ministry, and many other ministries, right, at the same time. So this could be the case. Next, a cabinet minister is overall responsible for the smooth, effective, and efficient functioning of the ministry under his charge. So he is overall responsible. If any untoward happenings take place in his department, under his department, then it is the cabinet rank minister who is held responsible, by the government, by the people, by the parliament, right? He is part of the cabinet, the apex decision-making body in the government, whose chairman is the prime minister. So cabinet rank ministers are part of the cabinet. As the head of the ministry, it is he and not the MOS rank ministers who takes the final call on all policy matters relating to that particular department or ministry. So it is Amit Shah and not any other junior minister in his ministry who would be taking the final call on all policy decisions, right? Now, ministers with MOS rank. Ministers with MOS rank are considered as junior ministers assisting their respective cabinet ministers. So an MOS is associated with a particular department or ministry, and he would be assisting his cabinet rank minister, his boss. That will be, the cabinet rank minister in charge of the whole department will be his boss. So the minister of state associated with a particular department, they do not have independent functions. In fact, they function under the supervision of the cabinet rank minister, right? They discharge routine functions pertaining to internal administrative matters of the department concerned. They are not entitled to take policy decisions. Any decision that is that is a shift from the existing policy cannot be approved by the Minister of State. It must be considered and decisions must be taken by the cabinet rank minister of that department. So MOS rank ministers associated with a particular department, they cannot take policy decisions. They only discharge routine administrative functions pertaining to that department. The MOS rank ministers are not entitled to participate in cabinet meetings unless, in certain cases, they are invited into the meetings of the cabinet, right? So if they are not invited, they have no entitlement to participate in the cabinet meetings, right? But it may happen that certain issues would be on the agenda of the cabinet meeting, and a particular minister of state rank could be invited so that he can give his opinion there in the cabinet meeting. A cabinet rank minister heading a ministry may have more than one MOS rank ministers, right? So in the last government, Amit Shah had a number of MOS rank ministers in his ministry, that is Ministry of Home Affairs. Now, ministers of MOS rank with independent charge. Now, these ministers also have the same rank, that is MOS rank. They are also junior ministers. But then, since such ministers do not have any, cabinet rank minister as their head, they directly report to the prime minister. So such departments or ministries are, taken care of, are supervised distantly by the prime minister. So they are called MOS rank ministers with independent charge, means they do not have any cabinet rank minister as their superior, as their immediate boss. They directly report to the prime minister. They directly receive instructions from the prime minister with regard to the functioning of the department, with regard to the policy decisions pertaining to their department. Since they are MOS rank ministers, they also cannot take policy decisions pertaining to the department. Any policy related matter must be referred to the prime minister by them. So that's their status and role. The prime minister sometimes does not appoint any cabinet rank minister to head a ministry or department. He chooses to directly supervise such ministries. In such a scenario, that ministry is placed directly under the MOS rank minister who reports to the prime minister with respect to the functioning of that ministry. Hence, such MOS are referred to as MOS with independent charge. Nevertheless, they are not entitled to participate in the cabinet meetings unless invited specifically for the purpose. Whatever we have discussed, I have presented this in a tabular form so that you can, compare, contrast, and understand it further. So you please go through it, the same points mentioned differently. And you should know, before we wind up for the day, you should know that besides the two categories that we discussed, that is cabinet rank and MOS rank, there existed earlier two more categories of ministers. Earlier means till 1990s, okay? There used to be another category, that is deputy ministers. That was a rank. A category of ministers used to be there. They used to be called deputy ministers. They were part of the Council of Ministers. And even earlier, that was till that practice continued till 1970s at the union government level. There used to be ministers. They used to be called parliamentary secretaries. But this practice of having these categories of ministers, this practice has been abandoned in the 1990s because by the end of the 1990s, we amended Article 75 and provided a cap, that is an upper limit in the strength of the Union Council of Ministers. You should know that the size of the Union Council of Ministers has been capped now and by the Constitution 91st Amendment Act. So you should remember this Amendment Act, and that has put a cap on 15%, not more than. So the size of the Union Council of Ministers shall not exceed 15% of the total strength of Lok Sabha, that is lower house of the parliament, popular house of the parliament. So now what is the size of the lower house, that is Lok Sabha? That is 543. And 15% of 543, it comes to 81. So the maximum strength of the Union Council of Ministers now cannot be more than 81, including the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister and 80 ministers maximum. And therefore, the practice of having these categories of ministers that has been abandoned because now it is no more possible to create so many categories and accommodate so many ministers. Earlier, before this Amendment Act, there used to be more than 100, 110, 125, particularly during the coalition times. Because of the coalition compulsions, Union Council of Ministers had over 100 ministers, because Prime Minister or the party leading the coalition, that party had to accommodate its constituents into the Union Council of Ministers. So because of the coalition compulsion, generally speaking, the size of the Union Council of Ministers used to be much larger, and that was not only a drain on public's wealth, public money, but also it also created a problem of coordination among various ministries and in the government of India. And therefore, finally, through this Amendment Act, this practice was abandoned, and therefore now we have just two categories of ministers: ministers with cabinet rank and ministers of MOS rank. And some ministers of MOS rank are also given an independent charge, but that's not a separate category. Right? Prime Minister Modi in 2014 started with 45 ministers in his Council of Ministers. Okay? But by the end of his first term, it rose to 77. Then again, in his next stint, that started in 2019, he had 75 ministers in his Council of Ministers, and this year he has 71. In the beginning itself, maybe there would be further expansion of the Council of Ministers in the months to come or years to come, but then it should not cross more than 81, including the Prime Minister. So that's the constitutional position. Okay, guys, so before we wind up for the day, please test yourself. Which of the following is or are not correct about the Council of Ministers? The cabinet is a part of the Council of Ministers, but not the whole of it. The Minister of State with independent charge can participate in cabinet meetings. The size of the Council of Ministers cannot exceed 15% of the total strength of Union Parliament. Do you think the statement is correct? So there are three statements given. You have to identify which is or are not correct. So I'm not going to tell you the answer here. You can get the answer in my next video, right? So in the next session, I'll give you the answer. So please keep watching. Take care of yourself. Thank you very much.